I keep saying it now, but I think F1 in 2025 is going to get really spicy. McLaren have basically come out today and said that Red Bull are going to face the full consequences in 2025 for 2024. And what does that mean? Well, it's probably not quite as spicy as you're thinking, but it's still really interesting. So let's jump in and let's talk about it. So Planet F1 have translated an article from De Telegraaf. I don't know if that's German or Dutch, by the way. I don't know. But basically it's talking about how McLaren are warning Red Bull that they're going to face the full consequences in 2025. Now, that's maybe being a little bit too dramatic, because I think when you hear that, you're probably thinking about, you know, the incidents that with Max Verstappen and Lando Norris and them coming together or not coming together, etc. in a few different races. But actually more specifically here, it's Zach Brown basically talking about the personnel changes and how that's probably going to impact them in 2021. Newey and Wheatley are both leaving, and that's going to have like a big impact, he says. And he says they're going to face these consequences in 2025, but actually it might get even worse for them in 2026. So what he said was Red Bull has lost the necessary important people, and I think we haven't seen the full consequences of that. Hence the clickbaity title of this article and probably my video about facing the full consequences in 2025. He also says it's a good team, but you also have to look at the culture and the atmosphere. Now this, I assume, is probably alluding to the scandal with Christian Horner and how that basically, you know, threw a grenade into that team and it was just chaos from that moment on, probably partly possibly leading to Newey's departure as well. And yes, I think the fallout of that is going to be pretty vast. It's possible that we saw some of that in 2024 already, because they did slip in the Constructors' Championship. There's no doubt about that. How much of that was just a distraction? How much of that was them maybe like being like, well, we've won this year, let's move on to the next. And then maybe they were like, oh, it got a little bit closer than we wanted. Who knows? I do think, though, that obviously Adrian Newey is a very important figure, or well, he was a very important figure at Red Bull, and he is going to have a massive influence now that he's not there. He also says for them, 2026 will be an even bigger challenge. That's when they come with their own engine for the first time, and I don't remember a team with its own engine being immediately competitive in the first year. And that's a fair point, right? Like, they're going to have to make their own engine, and yes, whilst they've been working on it for a while, I think they actually technically started in 2021. It's obviously going to be a big challenge for them to come in and be competitive straight from the off. There's going to have a complete change in regulations, which obviously they're now not going to have Adrian Newey sort of guiding them through that process, and they're going to be making their own engine competitively for the first time properly. Red Bull could be in some serious trouble in 2021 for sure. Zach Brown and McLaren, though, are actually going to be pushing the boat out in 2025, they say. I can divulge that we are going to develop the car considerably, and I am impressed by how brave the team is in terms of plans for next year. We are really going to make a lot of changes. In Formula 1, you also have to take risks if you want to be the best. I don't think you have a choice. So McLaren are going to, you know, roll the dice and see what they can produce in 2025. There's a big kind of conversation here is how much work do you actually want to put on your 2025 car? Because you can now develop your 2026 car, at least somewhat. I'm not sure the exact technical regulations, but they were able to go into the wind tunnel, I think, starting from January 1st. So some teams will sacrifice 2025 completely and go all out in 2026. And some will kind of like try and edge their bet. Some might pure pump 2025 because maybe they think that's the year. Maybe that's what McLaren are thinking. Who knows? But it's going to be very interesting indeed. Red Bull's Horner, though, is pretty sure that Red Bull has the strength to deal with Newey and Wheatley's exit. Zach Brown doesn't think so. Zach Brown thinks they might struggle, but Horner's pretty confident, so we'll have to wait and see which one is right, I guess. He does say it's sad to see them go, and they've actually both played important roles in the team, but the show goes on, and I think we've got the strength and depth. But the show goes on, and I think we've got the strength and depth we've got. And the show goes on, and he talks about how I think we've got the strength and depth to basically handle that. He's not expecting them to rebuild because it's literally two people. It's basically just an evolution. That makes sense, but two probably very important people. And let's be honest, Newey is sort of seen as the aero god, potentially one of the most important figures in all of F1. So we'll have to wait and see what Red Bull actually achieve in 2025 and 2026. Now, some of you would have been thinking about the consequences of, you know, the actual driving from Max and that kind of fallout there. Obviously, that's not what Zach Brown was really talking about, but you know somebody who is? Anthony Davidson. So he's talking about how Norris said things that they didn't want to hear after the Max Verstappen incident. The Austrian GP was very interesting for quite a few reasons. I personally thought Max was being a little bit over the line in that race. And Norris at the time did, right? He also said that Verstappen was being reckless and a bit desperate and all that kind of stuff, right? Anthony Davidson, though, is just talking about how Norris came out and said after the fact something that I think the rest of us didn't really want to hear. First, he talks about how he was desperate, like immediately after the race, he's talking about how he was desperate, how he was aggressive and all that kind of stuff, right? How he was, not happy with what Verstappen had done. And then only 4 days later, he kind of U-turned. He said he doesn't need to apologize. It was good racing, at times close to the edge. I mean, for me, at times it was beyond the edge. But Anthony Davidson's point here is that he would have preferred if he actually stood up for himself, kowtowed to Verstappen here. And he says it wasn't what we wanted to hear, basically. And I kind of don't disagree. And the evidence for that is George Russell. You probably know, but in Qatar, obviously Max basically slowed down and George nearly crashed into him. And then Max was saying that he'd never seen a driver do what he was doing in the steward room. And it really pissed off Max, basically, right? But then Norris came back and it was basically calling him a bully and all that kind of jazz. Anthony Davidson's point basically is he kind of wishes that Norris did what Russell was doing and actually stood up for himself. And on some level, I kind of agree with that. I do think that would have made sense to stand up. I'm not saying that Russell was right in the Qatar incident, but I think Norris was probably right about Austria and Max going over the line there. Max, obviously an insanely talented driver, probably the best in the world, probably, you could argue, one of the best ever. But that doesn't mean he's always a good boy. Sometimes he's a little naughty boy. And I probably would have liked to have seen Norris actually stand up for himself there. There have been some big changes at Liberty Media. And no, I'm not talking about them removing Spa from the calendar, although that is pretty important and pretty sad. No, Derek Chang has been announced as the Liberty Media president and CEO, and he's going to start his role on February 1st. It was previously held by Greg Maffei, and I'm not really sure how you pronounce his name, so do forgive me. Apparently, Chang does have extensive knowledge of sports broadcasting deals, and he was recently working for Everpass Media. Look, I'm not going to tell you I really know anything about Derek Chang. Hopefully, he's a good influence in F1. I guess that's all that really matters, right? I mean, Liberty Media do get some things kind of sketch, but they've been instrumental in growing F1 in recent years, so I kind of expect that to continue. Maybe the FIA I might have more of a problem with, but let's not talk about that right now. And there's been a little bit of extra confusing news in the Colapinto saga at Alpine Color Alpinto. Okay, I'll show up, that was a bad joke. But basically Alpine have added another reserve driver and they're going to give him the Japanese first free practice 1 run. It's not Colapinto, it's Ryo Harakawa. I just love butchering people's names, I do apologize. Basically, they're giving him a test. He's tested at some of the teams previously. I kind of don't know anything about him, but I doubt he's in any kind of real contention of getting a seat anytime soon, and especially not at Alpine when they're probably looking to replace Duhan with Colapinto any chance that they can get. But it's an interesting development nonetheless. I keep saying it and I really mean it. I do think 2025 is going to be really spicy. I'm hopeful that 2026 will be interesting, but obviously it could be that one team just gets a handle on the new regulations quicker than everybody else and starts dominating. But for now, let's just concentrate on 2025. I think it's going to be really, really interesting. McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, all fighting at the front. Yeah, could be good. I mean, hell, even Aston Martin could end up coming back. It's going to be huge. Make sure you like, subscribe. Have a beautiful day. Goodbye.